Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a demographic shift so massive it literally rewired the economic and social fabric of an entire continent. And the crazy part? It happened quietly, right under our noses. We are looking at the silent collapse of Eastern Europe. Okay, let's dive into this. 20 million. I want you to really let the sheer scale of that number sink in. We are talking about 20 million missing people. To put that into perspective, that's more than the entire population of a lot of whole countries. It is a totally mind-boggling figure. Just imagine city after city, town after town, simply emptying out. This isn't just a minor blip or some, statistical anomaly. It represents a massive, unprecedented chunk of the population that just packed up and relocated from their home nations over the last 30 years. And that naturally brings us to the ultimate question, right? Where did they actually go? When 20 million people quietly exit their home countries, they don't just disappear into thin air. They relocate. They build entirely new lives. But to really understand the impact here, we've got to trace this incredible journey back to its starting point. Section 1. The missing 20 million. Tracing the exodus. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it maps out the timeline. This wasn't an overnight stampede. It was much more of a slow burn. It all kicked off back in 1990 with the fall of the Soviet system, which was obviously this monumental geopolitical event that just opened the floodgates for human movement. By 2005, the migration pathways were firmly established and really starting to accelerate. Fast forward to 2020, and we hit that incredible milestone. 20 million people had relocated. It was a quiet, relentless 30-year exodus. And that brings us to this absolutely staggering fact. This was the largest peacetime migration in modern history. I really want to emphasize that word, peacetime. Usually when we see millions of people moving across borders like this, it's driven by war or sudden conflict or a massive natural disaster. But this was different. This was driven by open borders and sheer economic disparity. It's a slow, silent collapse of demographics that is literally unmatched in modern history when nations are technically at peace. Section 2. Fueling the West. Destination and drivers. So where exactly were these 20 million people heading? Well, they were heading west. But to truly grasp the impact of this, we can't just look at raw numbers. We have to look at who was leaving. Economists call this lost human capital. And the people leaving? They weren't just anybody. We're talking about doctors, engineers, highly skilled tradesmen. This was a massive, massive brain drain. These are the exact professionals and essential workers you absolutely need to build and maintain a thriving society. When you lose your doctors and engineers in these kinds of volumes, man, you are losing the foundational pillars of your nation's future. This whole situation created two very different sides of the open border coin. On one side, Western European economies experienced this massive boom, fueled directly by this incredible influx of highly skilled, ready-to-work labor. But on the flip side, Eastern Europe was left with staggering demographic deficits. They essentially became the labor engine for the West, but in return, they were hollowed out. They were left with rapidly aging populations and literally empty villages. It is a stark, fascinating contrast of economic mechanisms at work. Section 3. The price of open borders. The silent cost. And this price? It was paid heavily by specific post-communist countries. Nations like Romania, Bulgaria, and Poland really bore the brunt of this exodus. They became what researchers call hollowed-out nations. And listen, this isn't just some abstract economic term. In these countries, the impact is physically visible on the landscape. Entire villages have been left virtually empty, with often only the very elderly remaining. The vibrant, working-age core of these communities simply packed up and moved west for better economic opportunities, leaving a profound hole right behind them. So the crucial point is that behind all this macroeconomic data is a deeply tragic human reality, the Euro-orphans. These are children left behind, often raised by aging grandparents, while their parents migrate to work in Western Europe. Families are physically fractured, basically for the sake of financial survival. The parents are out powering the economies of the West, while a whole generation of children in the East grows up without their mother or father present in their daily lives. It's a really tough trade-off. Section 4. Defining real wealth. The balance sheet. Let's move to and see how this builds into the bigger picture. How do these nations actually survive systemically when so much of their human capital is just gone? Well, they rely on economic band-aids. First, you've got circular migration. People going west for seasonal or temporary work and then coming back, which creates the sort of revolving door of labor. But the true lifeline? Remittances. This is the massive flow of money that those 20 million people send back home to their families, to those grandparents and Euro-orphans we just talked about. These financial transfers act as vital, enormous economic lifelines that are quite literally keeping these Eastern nations afloat. But this heavy reliance on remittances forces us to ask a much deeper question. The source material for this explainer highlights a brilliant quote from the ancient philosopher Xenophon, who actually asked this exact thing 2,400 years ago. What is real wealth? Think about it. Is a nation's true wealth the foreign currency being wired back home every month? Or is a nation's real wealth its people, the doctors, the engineers, the parents, who actually live, build, and innovate within its borders? It is absolutely fascinating to realize that the questions defining a nation's survival today are the exact same ones being pondered over 2 millennia ago. So what do these demographic shifts signify for the future of the global economy? That's the final provocative thought I want to leave you with. When human capital moves on this unprecedented scale, literally hollowing out one region to fuel another, what happens next? Can the West sustain its economic growth without this constant influx of labor? And on the flip side, can the East ever rebuild its lost foundation? It is a complex, silent shift that has already completely reshaped our world, and honestly, its long-term impacts are only just beginning to unfold. Keep this question in mind because this is one demographic shift that affects us all. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.